Go.
All right, hey students, it's Miss Casperi. Today I am going to give you a brief demonstration on how to create a clay cylinder using the slab method, okay? So what I'm gonna show you today can be adjusted for any size and for different shapes as well. But today I'm gonna show you a cylinder and we're just gonna give you the basic breakdown, okay? So what you'll need is a needle tool, a ruler, slip and a fork. Slip and a fork. Slip, as you know, is the first stage of clay. It's watered down clay, kind of like mud. Okay, then we've got our fork. You'll need a rib, R-I-B, rib, and I've got wooden, metal, or rubber ribs in the studio, so whichever is your preference is fine. And then last but not least, you'll need some kind of circular template to use for your base, okay? All right, so step one, you're gonna need a small slab and a larger slab, okay? The larger slab has gotta be a bit longer, all right? And the small slab is just for your base, okay? So the first thing to do after you roll your slab, you know, is to remove that texture, okay? I've already done that on this larger piece. I've done it on this side of my smaller slab, and I just saved this one so we can do this on the demo. You take the flat edge of any rib, and you simply pull it along the surface of the clay to remove that canvas texture. If you want to add texture onto your clay, that's absolutely fantastic, but we want our texture to be intentional, right? Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut our base. You'll take your circular template, all right, and set it right on top, and just like we did when we were cutting out our tiles, you want to cut with the needle tool at a 90-degree angle to the table, right? So we're not cutting this way, we're not cutting this way. That would give us a bevel edge, which we don't want right now. We want a nice 90-degree cut. So I'm going to come right in here, and I'm just going to cut all the way along. I'm moving all the way around my template, and I'm touching the table with the needle tool the entire time to make sure that it cuts all the way through. All right, so as you can see, even just a small little slab would have given me multiple bases on here. So depending on the size cylinder you're making, you might not need a slab this big for your base. All right, so we have our circular base. Now anytime we cut anything out with a needle tool, we want to use our finger and gently smooth the edges, knowing that any sharp edges will be dangerous once it fires, because this is going to be hard as stone when it comes out of the kiln. So we want to come around the edge and soften any hard edges. All right, so we've got our base. We're going to set that aside. Next step is to create our walls, all right? So first you want to decide how tall you want your cylinder to be. If you want it to be short, then you're going to cut something without as much height, all right? But if you want it to be taller, then you'll cut it a bit taller. It's up to you. Depends on if you're making a mug or what you're making. In our class, we'll be making luminaries. So I'm gonna go a little bit taller with my cylinders. So first step is just to get ourselves some straight edges. So again, at a 90-degree angle, right? I'm not going this way or this way. I'm gonna go ahead and cut straight down the clay, okay? And give myself a clean edge on one side and a clean edge on the other side, trying to make these two lines as parallel as possible. Okay, boom. All right, now the next step is we need to find how long our slab needs to be. Now with our base being rather small, we're gonna cut off quite a bit of this. It's not gonna have to be that long, right? So let's take our slab and wrap it around our base, okay? And just give ourselves an idea of what we're gonna need to cut here. So if we overlapped our slab, it looks like we would need to cut right down here, okay? So what I'm gonna do is with those markings that I've made, I'm gonna lay it back down and I'm going to use my ruler. Now, up until this point, I have told you, and I've made a mark here and here in terms of how big my slab needs to be. Now, up until this point, I've always had you cut at a 90-degree angle, but this time we're gonna do it a little bit different. We're gonna cut a bevel edge, okay, which is a 45-degree angle. So I'm going to lay my ruler down. It doesn't have to be perfectly 45 degrees, but you're going to tilt the needle tool and pull through the clay in this way, creating a beveled edge, just like this. Okay? So I've essentially created an edge that's got a little slope to it. I'm going to do the same thing to the other side, but I need to flip my slab over first. That's important, okay? So once again, coming up to the mark that I've made and making sure that it's parallel with the other side, right? And again, 45-degree angle, I'm going to give myself a bevel cut. All right. Next up is slipping and scoring. Let's pause.
Go.
Okay, I gotta give a shout out to Alicia behind the camera there. Thank you, girl. Okay, so anytime you're joining two pieces of clay, you've got to slip and score them. What does that mean? Scoring is when you scratch it up, and slip is when you apply slip, which is the first stage of clay, watered down clay, right? So this slab is going to come around and attach to itself to create a cylinder. So we've got to score the edges. So with my fork, I'm going to, and you might want to get up on there so they can see that, I'm going to score this area, basically going back and forth and sort of like creating a crosshatch here. I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. Remember, it's on the back side of the clay here, the beveled edge. So I'm just going to lift it up, and I'm going to score it up. There are all kinds of groovy tools for scoring, like these metal paint brushes that potters use, but I find a fork to work just fine. So I've got those scored. Now, I'm going to be attaching it also to the edges of my slab. Take note that you have two choices when you're measuring your slab around your base. You can measure it around the edge, or you can take the slab up onto the base. Let me show you exactly what I mean. So you can measure around the edge like this, which is what we did, or you can be on top of the slab in this way. Either one is fine, okay? But we measured around the edge. So we're going to score around the edge. So I'm just gonna take my fork and score up this entire edge. I tend to just drag the fork along the clay in one way and then drag it across in the other way, kind of creating these cross-hatched marks that score it up nicely. All right, then I'm gonna think what's adjoining to this, and it's actually this edge, right? So I'm also going to score this edge. Pulling one way, and then pulling the other way. All right, so all of our scoring has been completed. Now it's time for slip application, all right? So when I add slip, I really just glop it on, and I don't know a better word to use besides glop. Basically what you're trying to avoid is smoothing it, right? Because you've just made this surface all scored, and you don't want to smooth that up. The more disturbed that the clay is when you're applying this, the better they're going to fuse together, right? The goal of slipping and scoring is so the clay remains joined and doesn't start to come apart in the drying or firing process. So you really want to allow this to be glopped on and not smooth, so that those two surfaces are going to come together. They'll kind of join like Velcro, is the hope. I usually apply slip to both surfaces. Kind of better to overdo it than underdo it, but at the same time, if you add too much slip, your project is going to get too wet and it'll start to cave in on itself. All right, with all of the areas that are going to be joined together, scored and slipped, we're ready to construct. So I'm going to lift up my slab, I'm going to place it on the edge of my base, and I'm just going to come right around. Now, you can see I'm a little big there, all right? I went a little far, which is better than not, right? We don't want to be short, so I'd rather have it that way than not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to redo one of these edges to make it fit right. All right, so I'm going to take my needle tool, and again, using a beveled edge, all right, just like this, I'm going to come right down. Now, if you measure perfectly, you won't even have to worry about this, but I don't know if you know that I'm not perfect, but I'm not. And you know, I messed that up, so I had to cut it. Again, it's at a beveled edge, and I'm gonna go ahead and do my slip and score technique one more time. Make sure all of this is nice and sort of pulled apart and the clay is disturbed. Remember, clay has a memory, so you want to give it a new memory so it doesn't try to dry back in its original position. That's another part of the scoring. All right, now we're at a really good fit here, and all I'm going to do is bring these two beveled edges together, just like this. I'm going to give it a little bit of pressure. I'm going to use my hand on the interior to hold against where I'm pushing on the exterior. And we're just going to bring this together just like this. Now at this point, if you have time, it's often nice to set it aside for about 20 minutes and let it set up. Not to leather hard, but just to give it a little bit more stability in its structure. If you let it dry, it'll be a little bit stiffer, right? But for the sake of this demo, I'm not gonna worry about that right now. So any excess clay or slip, I'm gonna go ahead and remove, okay? And now comes the fun part of trying to make this connection look like it never existed. As you can see, I'm taking the clay from this side and I'm pulling it over to the other side. And the whole goal is to basically make this seam completely disappear. If you've done sewing, it's kind of similar in that way. You can also blend the interior as well. You're gonna wanna do that, all right? Now the last step is to take a rib tool, all right, and complete the smoothing process. This will naturally fill in any holes that we've missed, as well as completely smooth the surface, all right? You want to make sure to take it, whether you've put your slab on top of it or on the edge of it, what you're going to want to do is make sure that this seam is completely, has completely disappeared, okay? So I'm going to take my finger once again and I'm going to pull that clay across this connection and I'm going to try to make it disappear. I'm filling in the cracks of where these two pieces of clay have been joined, all right? And we're trying to give the clay a new memory now. Again, once you allow this to get a little bit harder, it's much easier to blend and the piece is more stable. I just want to show you the basics here, all right? I'm going to take my rib and come in here and smooth the exterior. And get it nice and smooth. Now, on the inside, you can oftentimes take a little bit of extra clay and take a coil and lay it down on the inner edge, and then you can take a wooden tool and help smooth that in so you get a nice clean connection on the bottom and there's not a crack that's waiting to just get bigger as it dries, okay? This is the basic process of making a clay cylinder. Okay, I just wanted to give you a visual on this coil application for the seam. So inside, I can see the seam where the two pieces were put together, and we don't want that. That's gonna create a crack, which is gonna get bigger in the drying and firing process. So I'm gonna roll a fairly thin coil, and I'm going to lay it down on the interior of the pot. Once I get it down here, I'll show it to you. So I've laid it down on the very base of there, and I had actually already smoothed this before I laid down the coil, so you can't really see the crack. But now I'm going to take the end of a wooden tool and I'm just going to blend that coil into that crack with the wooden tool. And I'll do it on one area and not on another, so you can kind of see how it looks. So I'm not sure if you can see this area in here has been blended, and then the other area hasn't been blended yet. But that's how you can avoid having that crack on the interior of your cup, which will, or your cylinder, which will definitely cause problems as time goes on, certainly if you want it to hold liquid, okay? Sweet.